We have a president with a toxic tongue who has publicly and unapologetically embraced the political strategy of hate, racism, and division. Our president has more in common with George Wallace than he does with George Washington. It's both clear language and in code. This president has fanned the flames of white supremacy in this nation. His incompetence, his immorality, his carnage stops with us right here, right now.
So there was that today. 2020 Democratic candidates using stark language, as you just heard, to describe the president's racist rhetoric. That sentiment there echoed today by El Paso native Beto O'Rourke. He's running for president, also happened to be the target of a Donald Trump tweet mocking his name and telling him to be quiet.
You've been very clear that you believe the president is a racist. Is the president a white supremacist?
He is. He's also made that very clear. He's dehumanized or sought to dehumanize those who do not look like or pray like the majority here in this country. He said, I wish we had more immigrants from Nordic countries because those from Haiti bring AIDS. Those from Africa come from shithole nations. He's been very clear about who he prefers to be in this country and who he literally wants to keep out.
Couple of sidebars there. I guess we're saying that now. And secondly, a whole lot of Democrats want Mr. O'Rourke to stay right where he is and run for Senate in Texas instead. Back to the president. He had this response today before leaving the White House.
So my critics are political people. They're trying to make points. In many cases, they're running for president and they're very low in the polls. A couple of them in particular, very low in the polls. If you look at Dayton, that was a person that supported, I guess you would say, Bernie Sanders, I understood. Antifa, I understood. Elizabeth Warren, I understood. Had nothing to do with President Trump.
Back with us again tonight, Jonathan Allen, NBC News national political reporter, and Tim O'Brien, executive editor over at Bloomberg Opinion, also happens to be the author of Trump Nation, The Art of Being the Donald. Gentlemen, welcome to you both. Tim, as Trump whisperer, I have a tweet to read you. There's always a tweet. This is about racism. Just tonight, the Democrats' new weapon is actually their old weapon, one which they never cease to use when they are down or run out of facts: racism. They are truly disgusting. They even used it on Nancy Pelosi. I will be putting out a list of all people who have been so ridiculously accused. What is that?
This is also the man who 2 days ago was saying that it was time for unity and for bipartisan unison addressing all the problems that face the country. This is Donald Trump reverting to form. I think this is Donald Trump gaslighting. It's classic.
Define what that term means.
I think it's when you accuse someone of something you've already been doing yourself in order to manipulate them or put them back on their heels. And Trump, he's not an expert at many things, but he is an expert at trying to make people spin in the wind. It also is, you need no further demonstration than this, that he's feeling this criticism of being called a racist. Some people have said, well, it might have been bouncing off of him. But the fact is, he's on numerous occasions over the last month, he said, I don't have a racist bone in my body. I'm the least racist person in the world. He's now saying, no, Democrats, you're racist. I'm not a racist. All of this has started to reside with him, and I think that tweet is evidence of that.
John Allen, to quote you, back to you, the president had one job today. What was it?
The president's job today was very simple. Go to Dayton, Ohio. Go to El Paso, Texas. Meet with victims of these horrific shootings. Meet with law enforcement. Meet with the people who treated the victims and console the nation. And he did a little bit of that, and then he spent the rest of the day insulting other people on Twitter, insulting other people in comments to reporters. He had that one job, and it was the one thing he could do to end the day with what surely the White House wanted when it had photo ops in Dayton, photo ops in El Paso, to be called presidential. This is day 930, I believe you said at the top, of the Trump administration, and it is just like every other day of the Trump administration where he had an opportunity to end the day being seen as presidential and did not end the day having done that job.
Tim, Joe Biden was strong today. Cory Booker was strong today. as someone with a better than working knowledge of how Donald Trump works, how, and you're not advising the Democrats, but how would you advise candidates to come at him, to handle things like being called racist by Donald Trump?
Well, this is a warm-up to what they're going to experience now up until next November, a year from this November. And I think that what they need to do is stand strong and come back at Trump as much as he's coming at them. I mean, the advantage the Democrats have around this issue is this is a good one for Democrats. They're speaking to the people that care about them. They're speaking about the issues they care about. Most of this stuff is not in the president's wheelhouse. He's not authentically empathetic. He doesn't really care about race relations. And I think he's a profound racist. And so he can't really escape himself in these situations. He's not someone who's going to heal the nation in a moment like this. And I think that's why you see the Democrats sort of surging in this moment. But these moments can pass quickly, too.
John, think about the kind of wave wash of all of this. Tonight, Equinox and SoulCycle are getting membership cancellations because the head of their parent company is having a fundraiser for Donald Trump in the Hamptons Friday night. Tonight, Fox News is having a little bit of tumult after Tucker Carlson denies white supremacy. Shepard Smith confirms and denounces white supremacy, all of this in the orbit of this president.
I mean, I think we're going through, and I think Eddie Glaude talked about this recently on this network. Very dramatically and very profoundly about how we go through this generationally. And there is this continuing fight that goes on, and we keep seeing it again and again and again. And we're seeing it again, and Donald Trump has brought it to the fore, and we are confronting this deep division over race once again. What I think is so difficult about this is this president is something we have not seen certainly in generations, which is a president of the United States who has seen racial division in this country and decided not to paper it over, not to try to heal it, but try to exploit it for his own political gain, for his own personal gain, and at the risk of violence in the country. And that is something that is so different than what we have seen not only in my lifetime, but before that. We heard Joe Biden before talk about President Trump being closer to George Wallace than to George Washington. And I think for a lot of Americans, I mean, I'm 43 years old. I was born in 1975. I know who George Wallace is, but I didn't watch him in action. Yeah. So even that's an old reference. But George Wallace was never president of the United States. He didn't get close to the presidency of the United States. Didn't get anywhere close to it. Yeah. The person who was president in the George Wallace era was Lyndon Johnson, who was signing civil rights laws. Even before Lyndon Johnson, you had John F. Kennedy, who was working on a civil rights platform. You had Dwight Eisenhower, who sent federal troops to Little Rock to integrate Little Rock Central High School. I mean, so we have had generations of the president acting in a way to try to heal racial division, certainly from the presidency, even if the campaigns weren't always like that. And now you have a president that is seeking to exploit it for political gain, to exploit racial tension, to speak in racist terms, and that is so, so different.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.